Let me tell you about the time I went head-to-head with the queen of all Karens in our neighborhood and came out on top. It all started when I moved into a nice quiet HOA community with my wife and daughter. I had just finished my military service and was looking forward to some peace and quiet. The house we bought was beautiful, a two-story colonial-style place with a wide porch and a big backyard. It was perfect for us, and I had spent months searching for a home that would offer stability and community. Everything was great at first. The neighbors were polite, the streets were quiet, and I thought I had hit the jackpot. But then I met her, and she was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. She wasn't just on the HOA board, she practically was the HOA. She acted like the whole community revolved around her. She would strut around the block with her little clipboard, jotting down infractions like someone playing neighborhood police. One weed out of place on your lawn and she would send a warning. One trash bin left out a few minutes late and you'd get a fine. I tried to stay civil. I really did. I even introduced myself politely when we first met, but she gave me a once-over and said, "You better make sure your grass meets our height requirements before the next inspection." I should have known right then that trouble was coming. A few weeks later, I noticed that Karen frequently had guests over. Not just a few people, but huge loud gatherings. And here's the kicker, her house had a small driveway, but she would have her guests park everywhere, including in front of my house and even on my grass. Now, this wasn't just annoying, it was disrespectful. I had spent time and money maintaining my lawn. I had a sprinkler system installed. I had put up small decorative rocks along the edge, and here her guests were stomping all over it like it was a public park. The first time it happened, I calmly walked over and asked the driver to move their car. The guy shrugged and said, "Karen told us to park here," she said. "It's fine." I went to Karen and explained that I didn't appreciate people parking on my lawn. Her response, "If you don't like it, take it up with the HOA." That's when I realized she was using her position on the HOA board like a weapon, a way to push people around and bend the rules to benefit herself. So I took pictures, documented everything, even wrote down the dates and license plates of the vehicles parked on my lawn. After the fourth or fifth time I confronted her again, she just smirked and said, "You're new here. You'll learn to keep quiet." Wrong move. The next weekend, Karen hosted yet another party. Loud music, people yelling, cars parked all over our street, including on my grass again. That was it. Walked out and told the people parked on my lawn to move their vehicles. One guy told me to relax. I wasn't having it. I told him to move or I would call the towing company. He got aggressive but eventually moved. That's when Karen came storming out of her house like a tornado, demanding to know what I was doing. I said, "Karen, this is private property. You and your guests have no right to park here. You're damaging my lawn." She went ballistic. She yelled at me in front of everyone, and then she did the unthinkable. She called the cops. Actually called the police on me. Flamingo was harassing her guests and threatening them with violence. The police showed up. They were calm and respectful. I explained everything. I showed them the photos, the license plates, the logs I had kept of previous incidents, and you know what? The officer nodded, looked at Karen and said, "Ma'am, this man has every right to protect his property. You can't authorize people to park on someone else's lawn. That's trespassing." Karen was livid. She kept arguing with the officer, saying she was on the HOA board and that I had no right to talk to her guests like that. The officer replied, "Being on the HOA doesn't give you authority over private property. You can't break the law and expect immunity." She stormed off and the party ended soon after. But that wasn't the end of it. The next morning I got a notice from the HOA in my mailbox, a fine for disturbing the peace. I was stunned. Karen had weaponized her position again and filed a complaint through the HOA, claiming I was disruptive. Now I was furious, so I filed a formal complaint against her with the HOA, citing abuse of power, conflict of interest, and harassment. I also spoke with my neighbor Dave, who was a retired lawyer and who had also had run-ins with Karen in the past. He agreed to help me and even provided testimony for my case. Turns out I wasn't the only one. Several neighbors had stories about Karen abusing her role on the board, from unfair fines to ignoring legitimate complaints about her own violations. Together we gathered evidence, held a private meeting with the HOA president and a few other board members who weren't under Karen's thumb. The result, an official investigation into her conduct, and during that investigation even more stories came to light. Karen had been fining people for things that weren't even against the rules, like having a basketball hoop or leaving garden tools in view for a few hours. Meanwhile, her own violations, like those parties in illegal parking, were conveniently overlooked. Eventually, the board held a vote. Karen was removed from the HOA board for misconduct, abuse of power, and harassment, and let me tell you, it felt so good watching her face when she received the letter. But it doesn't end there. A few months later, I was asked to join the HOA board myself, not because I wanted power, but because the community had had enough of people like Karen. They wanted fairness, respect, and real representation. I accepted, and since then the community has become more peaceful. Neighbors talk to each other, problems are addressed respectfully, and nobody dares park on someone else's lawn anymore. Karen still lives in the neighborhood, but she's a lot quieter these days. No more clipboards, no more yelling, and she definitely doesn't throw loud parties anymore. She learned the hard way that just because you're on the HOA board doesn't mean you can bully people, especially someone who keeps receipts.